I think what's interesting about our identities, and this is what I tell to my students or the people I work with, it's called identity, not identity. And so who gets to decide, right? Who gets to decide who we are?
Hello and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, I interview peak-performing world changers in the creative, social impact, and vegan spaces. If you like what you hear on this episode, you're going to want to check out the bonus mini episode that you can access if you DM me at Isolde T on Instagram and you let me know you want it. You'll get access to bonus episodes, new art, my latest writing, and other fun benefits. And now, let's get to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. Super excited you're here. Incredibly thrilled and honored to have my guest today. Check this out. James Young is a Westchester-based educator, activist, and connector. He's the Program Director of Queery, a nonprofit organization he co-founded in 2018, as well as an adoptive father, husband, and lifelong learner. Yes. He's been awarded the Hudson Valley GLSEN Leadership Award in 2007 and the Pace University LGBTQA Center's Alumni Award for advancing LGBTQA rights, education, and equality. James, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Isolde, I'm so glad to be here with y'all.
Oh, this is so wonderful. It's funny how I said to you right before we started recording this, I'm going to have to talk about how we met. So we met at a wonderful restaurant in Lower Manhattan called Peace Food, where I was enjoying my vegan carrot cake and my latte. And I saw a pin you were wearing and went, wait, you stop, please. I need to have you on my podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about that pin and why, if you might know, why I was so excited about it?
Yeah, we actually had two pieces of art with us. One was the pin, and the other was my partner was wearing the sweatshirt with our GLSEN logo. And so what we do is the pin is actually a pronoun that shares our pronouns, and it's beautifully designed. I don't know if you've been to places where you have your name tag and you say my name is, and then you add your pronouns. Mm-hmm. We wanted to make it something that is a little more permanent, that someone doesn't just write on a marker, but that it's beautifully designed. And it's not just like in your face, here's my pronouns, but like a brooch, something you would want to wear. And so that's the pin. And then my partner was wearing the sweatshirt that we made with our logo for our Queer Zen meditation, which is our meditation group. And I think that's what kind of got you going, hey, what's going on here? And what's exciting about that is that we use art, right, as an educational tool, right? It's really, what happened to us and our connection was exactly what we had hoped for, right? Is that people go, wait, what is that? That's interesting. Can we talk about that?
And it was fabulous. And I loved it. And when I need this in my life. And I would love to, I'm going to tease this now. We're going to talk about it later. We're going to be doing a fun giveaway of one of those fabulous pins. And we're going to have an image of it in the show notes so that you can see. And there are a couple of things you can do. If you follow this podcast, you're going to be in the running to get that pin. And there's a phenomenal challenge, the Query Pronoun Challenge Instagram page, that if you put your pronouns up and you tag Query Pronoun Challenge, you will get featured. So there are a couple of different ways that you can be in the running to win one of these gorgeous, beautiful pins. I'm super excited about that. This is the first giveaway this podcast has ever done. So James, I'm really grateful to you for being here, for doing that, and for offering one of these pins to be something that someone can wear emblazoned on their clothing to share their pronouns so that they can stand up and also support this incredibly worthy cause. So I want to jump right in, if it's okay with you. You're the co-founder and the volunteer staff program director at Query. And a part of your mission is to make queer theory accessible and fun. But I would love it if you would tell me what Query actually is and what that mission of queer theory being accessible and fun really is.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So it's interesting because we were playing with the different ideas. We have an artist who's working on our team, and we wanted to do something interesting and fun. And what happened was I was driving one day trying to think, who are we? What do we do?
Mm.
What's our mission? And I started thinking about as an professor, I teach at a small college in the Bronx. And as a professor, I'm thinking queer theory is accessible, right, to those in academia, right? And I realized that not everyone gets to go to college. And I don't know about you, but when I went to college, when I was getting my degrees, I didn't take queer theory. It wasn't
No.
accessible to me. I mean, so even though it's accessible in academia, it wasn't quite accessible. So we thought, well, what if we took that idea of queer theory and merged them together? And that's how we came up with our name, Query, right?
I love it.
Yeah. And query also means, right, and to have a query is to ask a question. And so if you look at our logo, you'll see that question mark in the Q, because we believe that through asking questions, we find our most authentic selves, right? I mean, we really are. I'll speak from the I was raised in a world where people told me who I was, and I
Mm.
didn't know. And even at 47, I'm still figuring stuff out. I'm going, wait, what? What? This is a social construct? What are you talking about? This is what I
Wow.
thought was true. And so Query, the mission of Query is to make queer theory accessible for everyone, whether someone is reading. One more piece is that the academic writings in queer theory, I have to tell you, have you done some reading, Isolda, on like queer theory? Some of it's a little thick and dense, and I'm just like, what? So
Yeah,
we
not for
use
the layperson.
no. So we use art to kind of break it down. So for example, right, like this pronoun pin or the query pronoun challenge, the whole point is if we can share and respect pronouns, we make it easier for everyone else to do so. It's just that simple, right? It's a concrete way of doing something. Now we can find articles, right? Academic journals to talk about why that's important, and what dead naming is, and misgendering and all that, and gender dysphoria. Like we can talk about all of that, but I think the average person just needs to know, what do I do? How do I make it better? Because I think we all want to make the world a little better, right? And here's a simple way to do that. And I think that makes it more accessible for everyone. And that's just one example of the many programs we do to make it accessible and fun and pretty, right? we,
And it was, I mean, that's when I saw the sweatshirt and the pin, I was like, oh, this is gorgeous. I want more. And yet here's something that you said that I'm like, you you posited that everyone wants to make the world a better place and they just need some guidance on how. And these are simple steps. So before we get into my huge set of questions around that part of it, I would love it if you'd say, you said queer theory is not terribly accessible if it's from an academic standpoint. Can you tell me accessibly what queer theory is?
oh yeah. So uh hmm. So from a social, I guess I would say from a sociological perspective, right, studying society, studying human societies, what we have um, different branches of that, and within one is called social conflict, which is this idea that one group of people are fighting amongst another group of people for power, right, vying for power or more
Mm-hmm.
power, right? And so in the more woke world, for those of you who use that language, right, it's really about, like understanding the intersectional racism, sexism, the isms, the oppression, right?
Mm.
And so an outgrowth of social conflict is racial theories. Maybe we've been hearing a lot of the talk about CRT in schools, critical race theory,
Mm.
right? Maybe we don't teach about Columbus in the same way anymore, right? Maybe we teach about the accurate American history and the Civil
Mm.
War, right? Like instead of just literally whitewashing it, right? And so that's critical race theory. And part of the outgrowth, along with social conflict, is feminist theories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other is queer theory. So looking
Mm.
at the world outside of I'm going to use a word here, I don't know if this is going to work for everyone, but cishet perspective, cisgender, heterosexual perspective, right? Like, does that work? Should I define those a little more?
No, I don't think you need to define them more. I guess the way that I'm looking at that, because first of all, thank you for the clarification and the explanation. When I hear someone saying, what are your pronouns? To me, that someone is genuinely, I think, curious and wants to be respectful of the other person, right? You want to show respect in community, whatever that means. And so how does Queery, how do you believe that we can best do that, provided we accept that posit that you had earlier that said everyone wants to make the world a better place? How do we do that? Is it just, you should just ask? Or is there some awareness that we need to build inside ourselves to feel confident in asking?
Powerful, yeah. So, I'm thinking that, this is multi-layered, of course, right? So
Mm,
the easy answer is, the easy, quick answer that I usually give people is, people, people who, people who are interested in having their gender respected typically are very happy and grateful that someone would even ask them their pronouns, because we live in a world where that doesn't typically happen.
mm-hmm,
But I will add another piece about that, which is, I don't know, like, as an Asian person, Asian American person in the United States, I can't tell you how many times, Isolda, how many times people have asked me, where am I from?
mm-hmm,
And I'll, like, if you might ask me where I'm from, and I'll say, I'm in Westchester or White Plains, New York, whatever. But I also get the other question, which is, no, 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 no. Where are you really from?
mm,
And that's a different kind of question, right? Especially when they start doing the whole like little dance around, like, no, 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 like, your people, like, and they start pointing to their eyes. It's like, what's happening here? What's
mm,
going on? Why is this? And I don't know if people are getting it, but it's a little racial, right? They're not really asking me. They're in, I guess, social justice world, they're talking about like, this is othering in some way, right? They
mm,
othered me. And so I'm bringing this back to people who are non-binary or trans or gender non-conforming, how somebody who's trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming might be just going through their day. And I don't know if they need someone randomly to come up and say, hey, what's your pronouns? Because I clocked you as trans, or I read you as someone that's non-binary, and I want you to know I know, and I want you to know I'm an ally. So I'm going to ask you your pronoun. I think that's different, right?
mm-hmm,
And I think
mm,
if we use that posit that everyone's trying to do the best they can, right? Everyone does want to make the world a better place. I think that's a little misinformed. But your question was really, what do we do inside to make ourselves a little more confident? I think part of that is, there's academia, right? Queer theory is not accessible in regards to those articles, but it is accessible on TikTok. It is accessible on TED Talks. It is accessible in many different ways. And I think that in 2022, we can watch more of those kind of videos, right? On TED Talk. I live by TED Talks and
mm,
TikTok and Reels. And there's a lot more information there that helps me feel more confident about, oh, this is what I mean by gender, and breaking it down for myself to understand, like, why do I wear pink nail polish, or why don't I wear nail polish? Kind of like breaking down gender in my own head and understanding in what ways I have been, I don't know, for me personally, how I've been duped to think gender is only one or the other. And so I think doing the real work besides pronouns and asking about pronouns is trying to understand that gender is a construct, right? That gender is something we made up, and that it's not just binary. So I don't know, that maybe that's a little too deep, but I think part of being mindful in my journey as a queer person and also as an educator, as an activist, is understanding that my masculinity was handed to me and taught to me and maybe even forced on me. And so when I reach out for a cup at a store, I want to buy this cup or whatever hat, what I typically do is I bypass all the pink and purple ones because, oh no, those aren't for me, right? Those aren't for me. Meanwhile, maybe I like pink, or maybe that's a better shape that fits in my hand, but I'm not even going to look at that because of my trained masculinity. And maybe I'm admitting too much about myself here, but I think we can handle that here, right? Yeah.
absolutely. See, okay. This is fascinating and I love it. And I have questions that you may not want to answer or you might want to answer. It
Yeah, I'm
seems to
open.
me.
Let's do this.
Let's do it. Cool. It seems to me what you were talking about, like, oh, I walk away from the pink or purple or I don't wear nail polish or I do wear nail polish. It seems to me that you said it's a construct, and I would like to ask about going even a step further, that who gets to decide, right? Who gets to decide that pink is for quote girls unquote and pantsuits are for boys. And what is it about them, about nail polish or about earrings or about pantsuits or about these traditional sort of assignations, if you will, of one gender or another that we cling to in some way in this society so that we can identify somebody as one gender or another?
And, it's a deep question. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that there are some wonderful theorists who are playing with this. And when I say theorists, I'm talking about people who may not have a doctorate and doing research. I'm
Mhm.
talking about someone like Alok. Are you familiar with Alok?
Mm-mm.
ALOK. If you
No.
follow Alok and follow them on Instagram, they are always putting out wonderful content. But there's tons of other people too. But Alok, I feel like, is like really up there. And Alok, Alok makes it accessible because it's again not that academic reading.
Hmm.
And Alok is a comedian too, so that's kind of fun.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think what's interesting is this is so multi-layered. So on the surface level, right? Like pink, blue, whatever, like we can argue, we can even make the argument that 100 years ago, pink was considered a boy's color and
Right.
blue was considered a girl's color because it was meant to calm them, right? Like girls are supposed to be calm. But that's only like that's so super, that's in some ways that's problematic and the issue that we should talk about. But underneath all of that, if we look like from or above, like in a meta perspective, the issue isn't about pink and blue. The issue is, why do we think gender is binary? Right?
Exactly.
Like, yeah, like how do we come up with that? Like, I don't know, did you hear the NPR recording of the podcast on gonads? Have you heard this one? It's like a
No.
6 series. It's amazing. And they talk, it was I want to say it's Radio Lab that did it. And
Mm.
they did this whole piece and they asked people who have gonads. They just asked random people. And over again, people would say men do, right? Men have gonads.
Mm.
And it's scientifically, all people for the most part, right, have gonads, men and women and non-binary. Like ovaries and testicles are both gonads, but we have this concept, right, that's so gendered, and that gender is also part of the patriarchy. So you ask, who decides that? I don't know if there's any one mad scientist sitting there going, ha ha ha, I have created this. But I do think that it has something to do with colonization, right? It has something to do with Eurocentric values. It does have something to do with control of race along with gender. I was reading something recently about how the colonization of female bodies was racially motivated, right? It
Mm.
was to say that, it was something about like hair and removal of hair. I think I read this on Alok's page. And the idea of no hair on women's bodies meant that they were more sophisticated, right? And
Mm.
it separated them from women who had hair, right? It created this
Mm.
like, you had the luxury of being able to get rid of that, right? You had the money and the time to do that, whereas women with hair were considered more quote unquote savage. And that was also part of shifting the idea of race too, right? That white women had no hair.
Hmm. That's very interesting, and it's that notion is very close to my heart. Every things that you're saying, I'm like, yep, yep. I'm able to click, sort of check some things off. Something you said a minute ago, and I want to come back to this notion of hairiness, and I guess our notions of it ties into notions of gender, of femininity, and all of that. And for me, what you were talking about earlier about getting stopped and people going, where are you really from? I'm an immigrant, right? I actually wasn't born in the USA, but you can't tell. Other than the fact that I have kind of an unusual name, you can't tell that I was born in the former Soviet Union unless I tell you. Nobody ever comes up to me and goes, "No, where are you really from?"
Mm.
So it's a bizarre thing that I'm a white Jewish woman born in the former Soviet Union, but unless I actually mention all of that, people think I'm German heritage or Greek or Northern Italian, but been in the USA for generations, right? So it's interesting to hear it from your perspective, you who were born here are othered, if you will. And I, who wasn't born here, am not unless I choose to say those words. Oh, I was born in Moldova, et cetera, et cetera. So, but having said that, when I'm thinking of those notions of hairiness, women from my part of the world often are hirsute, are more hairy. And when we first came to the USA, my mother got an earful because she had hair on her legs and in her armpits, because in the Soviet Union, you did not shave because, frankly, there wasn't a lot of access to razors and it was a foreign concept to her. But wow, did she, once she had the pressure from her new friends, wow, did she start shaving and removing hair and all of that. So fast forwarding that to now, those notions of removing hair, there's a pressure to have, to wax and to do this and to do that. And then people who are uh, non-binary or trans, do they also face that sort of pressure? Like a trans woman, does she face pressure to remove hair? And how does that work within queer theory?
Oh yeah, yeah. So thank you for asking the question, and thank you for sharing your personal story and your mother's story. It's that sounded like it was a really challenging time. I imagine that her friends here in the States were probably like, "Hey, we are helping you out, right?" Like
Right,
they were
right,
like
for
well
sure.
intentioned, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And adding this extra pressure and financial burden, time burden, and financial burden, right?
Right.
Along with emotional work of like, what's wrong with me, right? Like it's yeah. It's interesting. So when I'm listening to you about that experience, about your experience and my experience. By the way, I was born in Hong Kong and I
Ah,
came here
okay.
when I was 2.
Ah, okay. Hmm.
I jokingly tell people I'm British.
It's
um,
changed so much, right?
right. Um, so yeah, so I was born in Hong Kong, came here when I was 2. But here's the thing. I think what's interesting about our identities, and this is what I tell to my students or the people I work with, it's called identity, not identity, right? And
I
so
love
who
it.
gets to decide, right? Who gets to decide who we are? And I think we're the best persons to figure out who we are. Like Carl Rogers, from a psychological perspective, Carl Rogers believed the client knew the answers. The client had the best information,
Hmm.
not the
Hmm.
not the scientists, not the researchers, not the doctors, right? And so from the identity perspective, it's really challenging because when I meet with Asian folks, they'll be like, "Oh, you're an ABC, right? American
Mm,
born Chinese,"
mm,
which is not a compliment.
mm,
It's kind of the opposite of being fresh off the boat, which is the other thing that I hear within my community, right? Like that you're not Asian enough or you're
mm,
too Asian, right?
mm,
And I think that this is just a form of oppression, that there is no like, and I'm gonna just liken this to experiences that I hear about what women might go through, which is you have to be sexy, but not too sexy. Like you have to show some cleavage, but where's that line where it's too much, right? Like there are words for people who are not, and then there are words like prude and whatnot, and then there's words for people who are too sexy, right? And who decides that, right? Who
right.
gets to decide that? It's not the individual themselves usually, right? And
Yeah,
so
that's the point. Exactly.
yeah, and it's this constant like mind game. If you think about it, it's like this like gaslighting that happens to the person, right? Like this
Hmm.
constant like, is this good enough? And then when you figure it out, then it's like, wait, no, it's not. You have to try something new. And this relates to a term called passing, right? Like I think that you were talking about passing, if you
Hmm.
will,
Hmm.
as quote unquote the norm, the dominant culture. And yet you're like, but wait a minute, what about my identity as as someone who's from another country, as someone who has all these other parts of me. And in some ways, it sounds like that's not seen unless you share that with them and tell them that story, right? Or if someone's maybe woke enough to ask that question. And on my end, I can't escape it. W.E.B. Du Bois, sociologist, calls this the, oh gosh, what is this? Double consciousness, right? That it's that I can't escape that. When someone asks me where I'm from, I can no longer lean into, oh, they want to know about me. They want to know about my eyes, or they want to know about my skin, and where, like, you're not part of the norm, right? Whatever that is. And so I think that idea of passing or not passing is interesting, and relating this back to queer folks, specifically transgender folks, non-binary or gender non-conforming. And, I don't want to speak for that community since I'm not a trans person. I'm not part of the TGNCNB community. But I have heard stories of like the pressure of feeling like someone has to be ultra femme when they first come out, or ultra masculine when they first come out. And there's that balance later on that many people get to, of realizing just because I'm a trans woman doesn't mean I have to be super femme, right? Like, I think there's like that coming out process for that individual.
I feel like that's a pendulum swing almost.
Yeah.
That to me, what you're describing feels like I'm going to go further than I might even be comfortable with, to then wind up somewhere in the middle that makes me comfortable, where I feel like I'm at home in my own skin. And I don't know if that's the case, but that's what it sounded like you were describing.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. I think that's the experience I have learned in both groups that I'm a part of, which is the QueerZen group and the queer, what's the other group? QCBC, Queer Community Book Club. In our book club, we read books from queer authors, and we've read transgender history, we've read queer brown stories, beyond the gender binary. Like, so we've read many different queer books, specifically part of the books that are about the TGNCNB community. So therefore, we have members in the group that are identified as trans or non-binary. And I've heard over and over again stories like that, stories of like, I've always felt like I need to push a little further because I don't want to be clocked as trans. I don't want to be, I don't want to be read by someone as this. And so I pushed myself even further. And then I realized, but that's not what I want. That's not who I am. Like, why am I doing this? But that pressure, yeah. And that's what's interesting is you talked about the pressure from a woman, and there's pressure for men too, right? To be, I'm gotta be manly, right? And so I think that's the beauty of queer theory and what we do at Query, which is we're asking people to ask questions. We're asking everyone to ask questions, not just those in the queer community, because these gender boxes that we have, these norms, these rules, this pressure, I think in some ways it hurts everyone, right? Like it doesn't allow us to be as authentically ourselves because there are all these rules. Like, if I want to wear lipstick, I just outed myself on that one, because I just realized once I said that, there was a twinge inside, like, oh no, I can't do that. But if I were to, right? If I were to, like, there's that message that's buried in my head that says, nope, you can't. I think that might be my own next personal challenge, Isolde. You heard it here first on this podcast that last year, Isolde, I actually started wearing nail polish. I did that for a year to challenge myself, right? And it was weird. Oh my goodness. I had all these really interesting interactions. But yeah, I wonder if I will try lipstick. There's a part of my gut that says, no, you can't do that. But I wonder how much of that is my authentic self and how much of that is something I learned, right? And so anyway, just the point is, queer theory and Query, what we do is we ask people to ask these questions, not to change who we are, but to find out who we are underneath it all.
And I love that you said that. And what I thought when you were talking about the nail polish and the lipstick is that there's a big difference between I can't do that and I don't want to do that. Right. One is that reaction of, oh, it wouldn't be, quote, right for me. And the other one is, no, I don't feel like it, which is coming from a much more self-aware, centered, if you will, place. And that's a different kettle of corn. And I love that you said it in a way that made me go, yeah, there's a huge difference between what I feel I can't do or I'm not allowed to do and what I choose not to do. Two totally different things. And so when you talk about Queery and you're talking about the things that you at Queery, all of you at Queery are trying to achieve, you have things going on. You have programs and campaigns going on. I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about what some of those programs and campaigns are and what the difference is between them.
Oh, I would love to talk about that. I do have one more thing to share based on our
Mhm.
last conversation while we're doing this meta approach of looking at all this, which is in queer theory. Is that this is okay to do it here?
Of course.
Great. Thank you. So in queer theory, you asked about like what would they say about this kind of stuff. So I think passing is something we talked about.
Mhm.
But another term that's used is gender performativity or gender performance.
Mm.
And when I was first learning this, I was like, oh, yeah, trans people definitely have a gender performance. Da, da, da. And then the more I started digging into, I'm almost embarrassed because I can't believe how much I didn't know before.
Mm.
I'm here today talking about this going, I can't believe these were my assumptions. But I think that's the beauty of asking these questions. Gender performativity is something we all do, right?
Mhm.
Like how I get dressed in the morning, the fact that I work out to change my body shape, right? Like we talk about trans folks or gender non-conforming folks. We talk about them, oh, they're trying to change their body. We all, like, how many people have
Mhm.
gone on a diet or, you know what I mean? Like we all change or wear a certain piece of clothing so that we look a certain way, bigger, smaller, whatever, right? So gender performativity, the idea of performing our gender by brushing our hair, by cutting it short, by wearing it long. So it doesn't have to be just be lipstick. It could be the kind of shoes we wear. All of that, right, is unconsciously performing our gender. And so that's one level of queer theory that talks about, you know, what we do on the outside. But again, for those who are part of the TGNCB community and those who are cisgender, like there's a underneath lying piece of who we are too, right? So I want to be clear that if I wear lipstick or nail polish, it doesn't make me trans. It doesn't make me non-binary because underneath I still identify as a cisgender person. Right, like the costumes I wear. Is it RuPaul that said that? Like you're born naked and everything else is just drag, right? Like, right?
I
Like I
love
mean,
RuPaul.
I love that. I mean, that's queer theory right there. Bam, yeah. So thank you for letting me share that.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that because that's something I've thought about too. That notion of it's an adornment, it's not necessarily an identification, and if you unless you choose it to be, I guess. And so I'm super grateful for that. And by the way, I'm hoping that someday I will see a pin that says it's identity, not you-denity, that I can get from Query because I thought that was brilliant. I love that. That is amazing and wonderful. And so, yeah, if you wouldn't mind going through and chatting a little bit about some of the because you're offering Query offers this to people who are interested in learning more about queer theory and also make, as you said, getting it in accessible chunks. Can you talk a little bit about some of those programs and campaigns and what the difference is between them? That would be really
Totally.
helpful.
And
Thank you.
and I'm excited about making that pin now because a lot of our work is driven by ideas from other people's that people are like, no, you should do this. We want that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to making that.
That's
You'll
awesome.
be you'll be the first person we contact once we do that.
Oh, great! And I will put it out as something on this podcast in a future episode. That'll be really cool.
That's awesome. Um, so yeah, we have programs and campaigns, and we just stumbled on this recently. So, you and I were talking earlier about how we're redesigning our website
Hmm.
because our web we don't know what we're doing, right? Like we wanted to make a difference. We want to do stuff, and then oh, we need a website. Oh, Instagram. And I don't know about you, but for me, social media was a foreign animal. I
Mm.
never really did anything on it. And now it's a full-time job. My
Oh, I
goodness.
know.
And how to post and when to post. So we started creating this new website and we're hoping to launch it in February. So by the time you all hear this, it's already out there, hopefully. And because we had grown so much and we pivoted during the pandemic, because most of our most of our education is really not done through like a lesson or a lecture. It's more like using these art pieces or these, mostly art. And we use that as a place for discussion, for
Mm,
conversation, right? Like just like
mm,
you and I are having, that might deepen our own sense of self or raise more questions. And so we our first project was called Sticks and Stones, where we took hurtful terms that are used against or within the LGBT community, and we turned them into interesting rebuses. Now, again, academically, rebuses is a strange word, right? But a rebus is a visual puzzle. So think of like highlight magazines for those of you who've ever had that, right? You had those like pictures instead of words, right? Like, so we had, it was this fun, colorful, very childlike game, if you will. And they were put on these big canvases in an art gallery setting.
mm.
And we would invite people in to come take a look and try to guess what the word was. And people would go through a roller coaster of emotions, Isolde. They would look at it going, what is it? They have this curious, furrowed brow, like, what is it? And that's what we want. We want them to get curious, right?
Mm,
And
mhm.
then when they figure it out, they're like, oh, that's a bad word. They suddenly realize, oh no, I can't say that. Like these are words used against LGBTQ folks. Like, wait a minute. And then next to it includes like a definition and stories of how people were called these words, or some people reclaim some of these words. Speaking of reclamation, we call ourselves Queery using the word queer, and some people don't reclaim that. We have, right?
Mhm.
Um, but that's an example, right? In some of the words that we used to be used against us, that some of us are reclaiming. So anyway, so that was the Sticks and Stones program. And with our new website, we realized we had grown so much since the pandemic. And so we couldn't, with the pandemic, we couldn't do these art gallery showings and these small conversations that we were trying to do, right? So we started creating other programs. So now we have the difference between programs and campaigns. That's our new website. We're understanding, we're kind of like reorganizing ourselves. We're
Mm.
doing this Marie Kondo. Do we love it? Keep it, otherwise we're going to toss it, right?
I love that.
Yeah. So our campaigns, we've decided our campaigns are projects that are ongoing and long lasting. So Sticks and Stones, where we talk about words that are used against us or within our community, we decided that that's going to be an ongoing project, that at any time someone can request for us to come do a program with them, and we'll
Mm,
show the images and have the conversation. We also have programs, and our programs are something that we run weekly, that it's an open group where people can show up and participate in every week. And we do that in partnership with our local LGBT community center, which is the Loft. And currently it's all on Zoom. So weekly we run a Queer Zen meditation group. Every week we get together and we do these meditations Thursdays from 5:30 to 6:30. We have guest facilitators that come in, which is quite fun. Last week we had someone come in, one of our allies, Zoe Flowers. She came in and did this wonderful meditation about connecting the fragmented pieces of ourselves. Oh my gosh, it was gorgeous and beautiful. And she's such a wonderful person. Next, I just said last week, which I realized as a podcast doesn't make as much sense with time frame.
that's okay. Time is a construct too. So, hey.
Right. That's fair. Yeah, so we also have like someone like Soul the Drag Queen who's going to come in and do a piece on using tarot cards. And our meditation group is quite fun because it's non-traditional. It's completely free and it's non-traditional, and participants can come and go as they like, get what they need from it. We do a focus meditation, and then we pick a song for the week that goes with the theme, and
Mm,
people can use that as well. It's quite fun. We also, with Queer Zen, we also do a truncated version of whatever we do on Thursdays on Saturday. We do that on Instagram at Queer Zen Meditation. We do like a 7-minute, we call it our 7-minute Saturday morning 7-minute sit. And we
love
do
it.
that because we wanted to make it accessible for anyone else who's interested. And you can watch the recordings, or you can simply show up live and do the meditation with us. And speaking of Saturday mornings, Isolde, did you watch cartoons growing up on Saturdays? I don't know. Like I
Of
did.
course.
My favorite, I don't even remember what they are now, but I just remember good time with cereal and cartoons.
Oh,
And so,
absolutely. For me, it was Kimba the White Lion. That was my
oh,
favorite cartoon growing up was Kimba the White Lion because
oh,
he made all the animals in Africa go vegetarian. So
oh
there you
my
go.
gosh. I
Yeah,
have
they
to
were
go find that now. That's
yeah,
great.
all of the animals in his quote kingdom unquote were they all nobody ate each other. They were all vegetarians. They all
Oh
ate
my
or even
goodness.
vegans actually. They were all vegans, yeah. So that was my favorite cartoon. Anyway, keep
Oh
going.
my gosh. I can't wait to watch that. That's amazing. You know, it's interesting because I'm a vegan too. And, hence
Yay.
meeting at Peace Food Cafe. And what's interesting is, as a vegan, I find it's interesting because I feel like there's so much overlap. Like, I feel like any social justice issue, there's so much intersectionality, right? It's
Mm,
about why can't we figure this out together and stop fighting each other on these, right? Like, how do
mm,
we come together and make ourselves better, right?
right.
And maybe better is not the right word, but more authentically ourselves, right? Right. If we really dig down deep.
Which honestly, it's better too
Yeah.
because if you get to be yourself, isn't that better than pretending? So I don't know. Anyway, go on, please.
Yeah. So Saturday mornings, instead of having cartoons now, we have our Saturday morning queer fest, right? Like, I mean, that's not a real thing, but Saturday morning you can join us 9:30 and if you Eastern Standard Time. Again, that's if you're on the East Coast of the US. But yeah, people join in from all over. And then you can follow that up with our queer community book club at 10 o'clock. And that's something you would register with the loft. It's an hour long. It's a discussion about whatever we read that week.
Mm-hmm.
And what's great about queer community book club, which is considered a program because again, people show up every week. What's great about it, it's the focus is on queer community. We happen to also be a book club.
Mm-hmm.
So we build community and conversations through our lived experiences. And we use the book and the readings and our discussions from that as a trigger point to get to the real stuff, right? To get to who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Isolde, if you didn't do the reading that week, no shame, right? We're not going to be like, oh, tisk, tisk, right? It's more like show up and you're going to hear someone say something and you're going to be like, oh, yeah, me too. Or, oh, I didn't know that, right? And so it's really open for anyone to join. And again, it's not just for queer folks, although it's queer community book club. It's about people who want to know a little bit more and learn a little bit more about themselves and the world in which we're in. So you get to do that Saturday mornings if you want. At least when I say mornings, I mean on East Coast time.
I love it. But it's a great resource because, especially if you are just beginning your journey, whatever your journey is, to sort of self-identity, whatever that is for you, this is a really good resource to start to see and to learn and to build that community because I remember when I was in college, this was in the 80s, and there was a huge group of us going to a morning TV show, and it was right around when the first AIDS quilt came to the University of Michigan, and we were going to a taping of a TV show, and one of my dearest friends who is gay, he wasn't out to his family, so when we were in the live studio audience, he had a paper bag over his head, and it was a way for him to stay safe because he wasn't out to his family and he was out to a bunch of his friends but not all of his friends, and this way he could feel safe, so this query to me is such a gem because it's a space, it feels like a space where you can feel safe, and that is incredible, and I'm
Yeah,
so grateful that you have it.
thank you for saying that. Yeah, and two points I like to make here. One is there have been several people who show up to Queer Zen Thursday evenings or or well, depending on your time frame. Yeah, I have to remember in the virtual world, anyone. I mean, we've had people from England and Germany. We have a regular from Germany and from the Czech Republic show up.
I
So,
love it.
and for them, it's like midnight, you know. So it's a late evening, and then we have people from Seattle and from all over. Yeah. So, but people who show up for our Queer Zen meeting and people who've shown up to the Queer Community Book Club, what's interesting is I've heard over and over again that this is the space where I feel like all of my identities are welcomed.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that was a thing, Isolda. I didn't realize that was like, I guess I knew, but like when people say that over and over again, it makes me realize this is a sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of sad to me that this is such a sacred space, because I feel like that should be, our identities should be welcomed everywhere. You know what I mean? Like all of us. I mean, we had someone recently talk at our QCBC meeting and said, I feel like as a queer person, a lot of times my disabilities and my identity as a person with disabilities, I feel like that's not really addressed. Whereas here, I can talk about that. I can talk about like how, queer, I don't know if folks know about this, but like the whole Marriage Equality Act and all that, and the whole fight for quote unquote gay marriage, right? For marriage equality. It doesn't help everyone in the queer community, because if someone's disabled and receiving benefits, if they get married, their benefits go away. And so how about we talk about that, right? And so anyway, we happen to be talking about something along those lines, and this person's like, I've never been to a queer group where I can talk about this stuff, right? This is important stuff that's happening in my life, or talk about racial issues. And yeah, so it's not just about queer stuff. The other point I want to make is all this, you said something powerful here, I think, and thank you for saying that, which is, if someone's new to the journey in regards to discovering something about themselves, whether they're LGBTQ, whatever their identities are, this is really a safe place for them to explore and sometimes sit back and just listen even, right? Or share. But also, this is a safe place for allies, for anyone who wants to really start learning and understanding the experience. They can actually just simply show up, right? I mean, I know that I know that when I used to do a lot of work around like social justice, they would say, do you spend time with people of color, right? Do you have any people of color friends? Do you have any, LGBTQ friends, etc., right? And I'm thinking, well, how do you make friends with people like that? Like, am I going to tokenize them by showing up to I don't know, like a NAACP meeting, like that would just be here. I'm here to make a friend that's Black, like that's not gonna, right? That doesn't work. But at these meetings, at the meditation as well as the book club, people can show up, and then real authentic relationships and friendships can be created, right? I mean, it's available. There's an opportunity. And if people aren't up for that, that's okay. They can sit and listen, and they will learn tons from the reading, obviously, but also from the discussions of our lived experiences. And I think that, isn't that the beautiful part about like National Geographics and those magazines that teach us about those animals and teach us about, communities that we see through a lens, through a camera lens, right? That we can't actually see. Being part of these groups allows us to not only see, but also participate and actually create real, authentic relationships.
I'm taking it all in because I'm like, yes, I love everything you just said. Thank you, James. No, because first of all, you don't know anything about me, but my first job out of college was at the National Geographic Society. So I was like, yes,
What?
absolutely. Yeah. So, but what's interesting about what you said to me is that, or rather what's interesting to me about what you said is that notion of it's an exploration, and this is a safe space to explore. Whether you are someone who's working on your identity, or you're someone who would like to know more or be an ally if you can. And yet, one of the things that is challenging for me as I'm listening to you is I'm going, well, I feel like this is going to sound really strange. I feel like query in essence should be everywhere, in that it would be really great if safe space was everywhere, instead of this one sort of rarefied place. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because it feels like this is, I'm glad to elevate this and to share as with my many listeners about Query, but it feels like it stands out sort of in bas relief that so many other parts of the world of our society aren't safe spaces.
Wow. I thank you. Like I said earlier, when people say certain things in the group, sometimes I'm like, really? Like this is that kind of a sacred space for you? Like, to me, this is, I think that's the beauty of what we're doing here, is that what is that phrase, right? Be the change you want to see in the world, right? Like we Query wasn't around. I even give you the backstory. So here's the thing. We saw Black Panther. Did you see that movie years ago? Black
Wakanda
Panther?
Forever? Sure.
Yes,
of course.
Yes. I kind of in my mind saw you do the arms across the chest. Yes, I love that.
I totally did.
Yeah, so we went, my friends and my partner, like we went to see Black Panther, and then we left the theater. There's some wonderful sirens out there. They're like, hey, listen, this is important. Listen, everyone.
That's right. Perk up your ears.
Yes. So we came out of that theater saying, what? Like, for those of you who haven't seen it, I don't want to, give any spoilers, but it's been out for years. So
yeah, you can spoil it by now. Yeah. So anybody who listens to this show, James, has seen this movie, so go for it.
Great. So, I mean, there were tons of Black characters, not just one, right? Not just one trope, and they were nuanced, and their characters were well developed. And like the first character that died wasn't Black, and that the person in charge of the military was a Black woman, and the princess. There's just, I can't say enough about this movie. The princess, right? The princess, holy moly, was a scientist. Like, what? You can be more than just, a princess living in a tower waiting for someone to save you. What? Right? Like, we walked out of that going, what? This is great. This is great. This is great. And then my partner said, but wait, where were the queer characters? And we kind of played it through our head, and we're like, wait, what? That was missing. How come? And so this is where my partner first started saying, we need to do something about this. So we called up our friend who's a graphic artist, and we decided to make a comic. We decided to make a comic and we were so naive. So that we were so naive, as if there weren't any gay comics. we were the kind of people that's like, we have an idea, and we're the only ones who've ever had this idea. So we created this very, very basic comic, and what it was it was just like, it wasn't a storyline. It was more just like a one shot. So like we had this idea of like having this in a closet, there were two items hanging. One was a shirt, and one was a pair of pants hanging in the closet. And they were alive. They were talking, and they were asking the union suit, like a full, is it called a union suit? Like, it's a shirt and the pants all together. You know what I mean? Like, do you know?
Like in overalls?
Kind of, yeah, that works too. But it had sleeves and everything, like I'm thinking about PJs when I was a kid, like pajamas I used to wear as a kid, like it just zips right up, and it's a shirt and pants.
Right. I used to know them as jumpsuits, but anyway, yes, go on.
There you go, that thing. So you have the pants and the shirt asking the jumpsuit the same question, which is, are you a top or a bottom?
Ooh.
And it's meant to challenge, right, the concept of like, why do I have to be one or the other? like where's that idea from? Right, again, challenging that binaristic thinking, that dichotomous way of thinking. So anyway, we had a bunch of those. I'm not going to bore you by telling each one. What happened was that project fizzled and died because we had no idea what we were doing, and then we discovered there are actual queer comics, right? Like, so we then pivoted and started playing with that sticks and stones thing we just talked about, terms that were used against us, where some of us are reclaiming some of those terms. Anyway, so that's how it all started. The other thing you talked about earlier was creating the safe space. And I think when I was 17, you mentioned earlier that, I started this youth group when I was 17 in White Plains, this LGBT youth group. And that was through the support of my elders, right? My gay elders or queer elders. And back then, it was a gay and lesbian center. It wasn't an LGBT center. We didn't know any better. But I was 17 and I knew nothing. And they're like, you should start a youth group. So I did, not knowing anything. And I was in the Journal News in Westchester County. We had the Journal News, the LOHUD paper. And I was featured in it with my picture and everything. And all of my elders called me and said, what are you doing? You can't have your picture in the paper. They were fearing for my life because they're from another generation. I mean, to be fair, that Matthew Shepard did happen soon after that. So meaning the killing of so it's not like, they didn't have good reason to fear,
Right.
but I didn't know. Right. I had youth on my side and naivete. And so I was in the paper about it, talking about it. And one of the things I remember fighting them on, my elders at the time, was why can't straight people show up to this? And I understand that better now, that queer people need their space specifically so they can talk about things. But I also think that people who are allies should be able to join in and have that conversation too, because where are they going to have that conversation? Where will they have that conversation? Let's face it. And so I think Queer Community Book Club and QueerZen are places where people can do that. I think I was more of a forward thinker back then. It's still queer-centric space, but it allows allies to jump in and hear as well as participate and deepen their own knowledge. And the final piece I'll say about this piece with the sacred spaces, I want to be fair that, I think you're right that there is something magical. And I so appreciate you lifting us up in this way. Like, it makes me feel really good about the work we're doing and re-energized to go do more, especially after being sick for several weeks.
Oh, I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm not coughing in everyone's ear. But I will say this. I think that these groups do exist in other places as well, right? I think that, and here's the other thing is, if this is not existing in your local area and you want it, right, you can totally do what we did. You can say, you know what? I think that's the beauty, is that we were so arrogant and privileged that we didn't know we couldn't do stuff like this. Right. And so we made all these ridiculous, we started as a business selling t-shirts with these terrible terms, the rebuses on them, and people bought them up. People loved them. But like, we didn't know who we really were then. Right. Like, so as we continue to grow, we started building what we have here because we wanted to see this. And I think that if you look in your communities, you might find a program like this. Right. In addition to that, you also might consider, how do I do it myself? And hey, folks, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk with y'all. I'm happy to have conversations with, how do you make this happen? And I obviously don't have the answers because we're still trying to figure that out, but we can partner and collaborate and work together. And QueerZen and Queer Community Book Club does exactly that. We work with our local LGBTQ community center. They do all the Zooms and the passwords and all that stuff that I'm just like, what? How do you do that? How do you mute someone? Right. Recently, we had a Zoom bomb. Have you had that yet?
No.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was a bunch of young folks who joined our group, and it was crazy. And I'm so lucky to have the Loft on our side to help mitigate that and take care of that, right? And so I think collaboration really is where it's at. Just like our conversation here, like, we're able to dive deeper. I love getting to know you more, as well as share the work that we're doing and who I am. And I think that's really where the magic happens, right? That magic is connecting with people as authentically as we can, kind of playing that Brene Brown, let's be vulnerable, because that's where it's at, right? It's not easy, but that's where it's really at.
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope that's where it's at. Because we all walk around armored in one way or another. It's just that some of us can, to go back to what you said earlier, some of us don't need as much armor because we can, quote, pass, unquote, and others can't, And so there is this, there's a conversation, I think, to be had about how we support each other to feel safe, to feel like we can be vulnerable, because that is so important. Because if you're armored all the time, it must get really tiring to carry all that stuff around. So you need space where you can just be you. And we all do. But especially if you are someone who is vulnerable from the outside in, like you said, Matthew Shepard, I remember that. And it was so horrifying that this could happen. And yet it's not the first or the last time. So being there to hold space for someone to help them feel safe is crucial, I think, for all of us. Either you can give that protection or you need that protection, but there's a real conversation to be had, I think, about how we extend that to one another. And it's interesting, you were talking about, the comics. They're the Superman of Earth, Jonathan Kent, in, I guess, November or October came out as bi.
Yes.
And so, and there was a lot of pushback, but there was also a lot of joy and cheering that in the mainstream comics, that there is such a prominent character who's part of the LGBTQ plus community. What? That's amazing, because you said there have been gay characters and queer characters in comics before, but this is mainstream comics, and that is a big step forward, in my opinion. And my husband, who is a huge comic book nerd, was like, yeah, this is so cool. This is unheard of. And it's really neat because this is Superman we're talking about. And Superman is held like under glass, by so many people. So it's really amazing to have that moment where people can go, oh, I can see myself reflected in a superhero that's been around since the 30s. So there, it's an even bigger deal, I think, than even than I know, because I'm not part of that community. And yet I can sort of go, yay, and celebrate it. But having said that, the experience that I know many of my friends had when I was a teenager starting college is different than the experiences of today. But if you were talking to someone now who was 17, 18, 19, what would you say to them if they're looking for community, if they're looking for somewhere to go be like we said, themselves? What would you say to someone who's doing that? If someone's listening and they're 17, 18, 19 years old, or even younger, who needs a starting point, what can you help? How can you help? What can you say?
Well, it's interesting because I think about me as 17 and what I would tell myself, but what I'm learning about 17-year-olds today and the world in which we live in, which is social media and TikTok and all that, is that most 17-year-olds who are queer are so in the know. They're teaching me a lot of times, right, about these neo pronouns and stuff that I'm going, wait, what? Right? Like, oh, I didn't even realize to think that. So, what I would say is, you're on the right track, keep finding you. And I think they're already doing that, right? Because there's this trend on social media that really pushes for that. In addition to that, I would say, and maybe this is fuddy old me, I don't know, but I would say get off your phone and find some, that's not fair, not get off your phone, but because of the pandemic, maybe that's not such a good idea. But I would say, let's not do passive, kind of interactions. Let's do actual connections, like join a group, right? And experience those awkward moments of silence or those weird moments of ouches in a group where people are really trying to connect and get better, right? Like I feel like the devices that creates this asynchronous relationship where I can text you and then you can respond and think about it before you text is different than these real live conversations like that you and I are having. You mentioned that you hardly ever edit, right? Like you just have it really raw and open like this, right? And so like the awkward moments are going to happen, and that's a part of real conversation. That's I think when we talk about LGBTQ youth, I think that they probably have a better handle on the content and the knowledge. They have more of the terms. Some are even making up new terms. But I think that what may be missing is actual, real, authentic relationships and that armor, right? I think that when we connect with other people, I know for me, I still have the armor from my childhood, right? I was abused as a child. I still carry that. I'm
Mm,
still that little kid who's like needs that love and affection, and I'm looking for that everywhere I go. It's your job, everyone, to make sure you reach out to me and show me love. Isolde, it's your job to make sure I feel whole, right? And really, that's unfair to put on other people. And so I think part of learning about that is by being in connection with other people. So joining a virtual group, and then if people are feeling safe with masks and whatnot, I don't know what's going to happen by the time this podcast is released. Maybe, hey, I'll cross my fingers. Maybe the pandemic is over. I don't think it will be, but maybe it is. Who knows?
right.
Maybe you join your local LGBT centers. There's GSAs in schools, gay straight alliances. In middle schools, I mean, at least where I am in New York, there's a few middle schools that have GSAs. In fact, some of them are now called QSAs, right? Because the idea of gay was an umbrella term at one point, but it's almost like I'm just going to go off on a tangent here. It's almost like how he represented everyone, right? And so I think so. A lot of groups are calling themselves QSAs now, right? That's the evolution of that, right? So I think that there's more resources, and go and get them. Go and get them, and connect with people that are supporting, connect with people that are challenging you. And if you find any of those relationships toxic, maybe that's not the ones you go for. Find the ones that are challenging and going to be supporting you in some ways. I mean, that worked for me tremendously when I went to the loft at 17. The loft was literally a loft back then. Now it's in a church, but it was a loft in White Plains. For any one of you who are from New York or Westchester, you might know it. It was on Grove Street, and I walked to the loft. I took a bus from New Rochelle to White Plains, and then I looked at those stairs, a set of black staircase, painted black, and I was like, ugh, all these steps go all the way up there. And I can't tell you how many LGBTQ folks probably thought the same thing on the steps. Like, I've heard stories about people would walk up halfway and then turn around and leave right before they actually made it in their first step. And part of it is, addressing that LGBTQ identity or community, but the other is having to face real live people, right? I mean,
Right.
that's a human issue.
It is. And it's interesting, James, what you were just saying. As you were saying that, I was culturally, my husband tells me I'm an alien all the time, and not an alien just from another country, but an alien from outer space, because he says that I think differently than other people, and I'm cool with that, whatever. The thing is that what the result of that was when I was growing up is that I didn't know culturally, interactively, what was appropriate, what wasn't. And so I kind of had to feel my way. And when in doubt, I defaulted to asking questions and listening. That was my way of sort of going, I don't know what it, because I stepped in it. There were times that I just stepped in it big time and said the wrong thing, not knowing. I didn't know, culturally, my parents couldn't teach me. They knew less than I did. So, there are times you might feel that way. You might feel like, oh, crud, I just said something that was painful to someone else without meaning to, right? Totally, because by accident. And so what I defaulted to was listening. I would get very quiet and I would just watch and listen. And so, what are your thoughts on that with respect to someone who isn't certain about how to proceed? Is that a good strategy? And if not, what are some strategies for walking into the space and being part of that community?
My goodness, I love what you did there. That's amazing to kind of just like listen. I mean, Isolde, listening. What is that, right? Like, I have to tell you, like, my partner, in this pandemic, I have this, are they calling it a COVID bubble or a pandemic bubble? Anyway, I'm in this bubble with my family, my son and my partner, and then I teach, right, at a college level. And I have to tell you, my main complaint in life is that no one listens to me. Maybe you feel that way too. I don't know. But I feel like people are so ready with their own comments and their own ideas. And I love that you're like, let me listen, right? Let me step back and listen. Let me ask questions and listen. I love that approach. That's beautiful. I think there's probably like dozens of TED Talks about doing that to have healthy conversations. Let's do some listening. One of my favorites actually talks about the scout versus the warrior. I think those are the two metaphors. Like when we approach conversations and when we approach situations, we can approach it as a scout going in and going, what is this? Versus going in and saying, no, this is my idea, right? And I love that approach, the scout that you mentioned, like taking it in and maybe stepping in it and then go, okay, my bad. Tell me what's going on. And knowing that you can do that, that's a superpower. I think you've got some superpowers. You're the one that we should be uplifting. Oh my goodness.
Oh, that's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Listening is so challenging, right? And listening not just to respond, but listening to reflect on what this person's saying. And then my biggest thing is I've done some trainings with my partner. I'm like, hey, listen, just tell me back what I said first. And I know like parents do that, right? Parents kind of tell their kids something and they're like, wait, did you hear me? Can you tell me back what you said?
Right. Reflecting. Yes.
I do that with my partner sometimes. I'm like, wait, hold on. I hear you have a reaction, but can you first make sure that I understand that you understand what I said? Like, and I feel heard too,
Right.
And
Right.
I think that's an important part in relationships, right? Asking for what you want, not always getting it, but asking for what you want. And so if someone's new to this, right, and someone's like stepping in it, or someone's trying to explore or join a community, I love the idea of joining in and listening, right? Listening and seeing, like kind of surveying, observing. And maybe I might add one more piece to that, which is, I'm going to reveal a little bit more again, again, as a child who lived through a lot of abuse and abandonment. When I was going to groups at 17 years old, I had a chip on my shoulder. Oh, I still do. It's still there, as I mentioned, right? It's your job to take care of me. So I would listen, yeah, but I would listen for, you just said something wrong. Like I would listen to shut people down. I would listen to keep people away. And one of the things I might offer someone like me is say, maybe we listen with a little more forgiveness. I think in groups they say sometimes like, maybe we offer the idea that people are here with a good intention, even if they say the wrong words, or that we imagine that people are here with good intentions. And that's a hard one to do, right? To forgive someone for saying, so James, where are you really from? And I'm like, I can't believe I'm in this group. This group is horrible, right? Like to have that be my first experience of that group. But that doesn't mean I can't get something out of that group. And it doesn't mean that person who asked that question, it doesn't mean that they might not end up being one of my really closest and dearest friends, right? Yeah. So don't, for me, I think the advice is listening, but also like maybe not just shutting people out immediately, kind of like kind of see it through a little bit, see it through that first meeting, couple of meetings.
I agree with you completely. And it's, to me, for me, what you were just saying, that notion of, extend yourself in kindness, that like, I always go lead with kindness. That's the, that's the goal. And if I'm not certain, as I said, I get quiet. Somebody else might be uncertain. They might have a different response to their uncertainty. And if we all sort of hold space, then I think we get into that, into a place where we can pay more attention to ourselves and each other, and then improve the interaction. And I'm also a child abuse survivor, and one of the things that I think sets child abuse survivors apart is we become hyper vigilant over everything, and so you get to a place where you start sensing danger, and sometimes the danger is there and sometimes it's imagined, but you react anyway. So when you're already vulnerable, I imagine walking into a place that is going to be an exploration could feel really challenging. So, what you said, your point is well taken, that even if you're challenged, maybe you can not necessarily assume that someone meant to harm you. They just could could be ignorant, could not know, and then you can have an interaction about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Gosh, Isolde, yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And you know, I'm of two minds about this. I'm of two minds of everything I say.
Are you a Gemini?
Actually, Aries. But
Oh,
yes, I
what?
would fit well as a Gemini. Are you an Aries?
No. I'm a Libra. I'm a
Very nice.
quintessential Libra.
So yeah, I'm of two minds of everything because, like, like I obviously don't want someone to put themselves in a position where they're not trusting their own instincts, right? Trust your own instincts. Of course, if it feels not so great, maybe walking out of that group is important. And I've literally have done that. I've been in groups where I'm just like, and it's not about that one comment that one person said. It's more like, this is not safe for me, right? And taking care of ourselves, trusting our own gut is super, super important. And so yeah, there's that. But then there's also like, how many groups am I going to walk out of? You know what I mean? Like, that's my personal experience. Maybe that's not someone else's, but I remember like walking out of too many groups, ending too many friendships over one statement or another. And again, this is my personal experience. So maybe you're not going to do that, but I realized that over time, like I was shutting people out, like, and maybe for someone who's starting the journey on being an ally or discovering LGBTQ or social justice work, maybe we join groups and we are going to play with this idea that fish don't know what wet feels like, right? That maybe I'm that fish with that privilege, and maybe my uncomfortability has to do with my privilege and not necessarily someone attacking me, right? Like maybe it could be an attack too. And if someone's attacking me because of my privilege, I don't think that's a safe space, right?
Right.
But if someone's challenging me a little bit, right, I think that's a little different. And maybe they're not as skillful with it. I will say this though, Isolde. I think that I have in my life, I've definitely given up way too much power. Every time I walk into the room, I think the other person is better than me. That's my default, or that has been my default, right? On this interview, Isolde, you surely know what you're doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. That's my typical default, right?
Well,
And
you're doing great. So there you go.
Thank you for that. You're like a super affirmer. That's awesome. Affirmations are great. But I think here's the thing, like, I don't need to give up that power, right? And the other thing I do, Isolde, is I will do the opposite sometimes, because I will sit in a room and think everyone's better than me. And when someone makes a mistake, ooh, I got you. You're obviously worse and you're not safe. And so I create this like pedestal where either I put them on it or I put myself on it. And it's just another way to keep myself separate from people. And again, I'm just talking about maybe my experience, and maybe this doesn't apply to everyone, but I'm thinking that maybe a few other people have this default as well.
Sure, absolutely. And it's a lot of heavy lifting, right? Because then you're always assessing and you're always going, which is it? Which is it? Which is it? And that can be on our psyches, that can be really hard, because it's ceaseless, then you're in that space. And wow, I almost say, can we put that burden down and not have that in our heads all the time? Because I think it's not, you're not alone there. I think a lot of us do some form of that as a way to preserve our sense of self, to protect ourselves. And it can be a positive if you feel really in danger, but it can also challenge you in some negative ways if it's standing in the way of you living your best life. So we're always doing that seesaw, that teeter-totter, trying to figure out which it's going to be. And I'm like, let's lay down the burden. It would be really nice.
I love that, lay down the burden. And I actually have a tool I use. Would you like to hear that?
Sure, of course.
So I love food, and I don't know if that's like whatever. I could psychoanalyze that, but I love food. I love eating. And so like buffets before the pandemic, buffets are like my favorite place to go. Like all these options and as much as you want. Like what? Like Freud would have a field day about my oral fixation. Like it's great. It's great. But here's the thing. When I go to a buffet, Isolde, I know that at some buffets or many buffets, there's going to be something there that's going to be gross. You know what I'm talking about? Like the peas that have just been sitting out for hours and it's mushy. And I don't mean to hate on anyone who likes mushy peas. Maybe you like mushy peas and that's fine. But I don't like them. Right. I don't like them. And so here's the thing. Imagine myself going to a buffet and I'm like, ugh, I know the mushy peas are there. Ugh, you know what? If I see the mushy peas, I'm out of here. Like, I think that's how I approached going to groups or meeting people in my past. And I love this buffet example because I can literally go into a group and then go, okay, it's like a buffet, James. What are you going to do? Are you going to look for the mushy peas and forget all the 30, 40 other items that are yummy that you want? Or are
Right.
you going to look for those mushy peas that are gross?
Right.
And that's what I do is I've noticed that. I noticed that sometimes I will go, not literally, metaphorically, go to the buffet, look for the mushy peas, then take a plate. And here's the worst part. You ready? Put it on my plate. Right? I put it on my plate and say, oh my God, these peas are so gross. I put it on my, and then I'll look at like everyone else in the restaurant. I'm like, hey, did you try the mushy peas? You should look at these. And then I go around and give everyone else the mushy peas. Right.
Oh, wow.
So that's like, that metaphor works for me because I realize, why would I do that? I wouldn't.
Right.
So why don't I go into a buffet or restaurant, whatever, or a meeting and say, you know what? I'm going to look for what I want out of this. And let's see if I can get some of that stuff. Let's see if I can get some of the exciting things that I like, whatever
Yes.
they might end up being here.
The crispy artichoke hearts. Yum.
Yes. Yes. Find what we like. Yes, exactly. And if we do that, I don't know, there's a part of me that's like, I feel like our talk is moving more towards mindfulness and what we do in Queer Zen, which is, like, let's cultivate more of our own joy, cultivate more of our own pleasures, cultivate more of our own, like, instead of putting the burden down, which totally works, right? Why don't we just think about like lifting ourselves up, right? And so the burden just falls off, right? Like if we focus more of what we want, right? The Secret, do you remember that whole book and the movie and that whole
I do.
Yeah, it's like if we focus on more of what we want, I'll show up to a meeting and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is scary. I don't know anyone here. What do I want out of this? I don't know. I want to feel good. Okay, so let's find some places I can feel good. And let's do that. And I think Query provides that. And I think other organizations like yourself, these podcasts, I think that's why your listeners are listening to you, right? Because they're finding something. I'm sure in this talk so far, and maybe other talks, people are hearing like, oh, ouch, right? Or whatever. I'm sure I've said something, but I think your listeners are savvy and say, you know what? We want to get the good stuff out of that. And you find the good stuff. You leave the rest behind. You don't need it, right?
I hope so. But also, I mean, one of the things to talk about this podcast for a sec, I love getting notes. I love giving notes. I love getting notes, as in this could be improved. Great. This worked for me. This didn't work for me. Great. I come from a theater background and an English background, and doing that kind of feedback is fabulous, right? As a writer, I run the vegan writers group of New York City, and I've told them, I will always give you notes, but you have to know the kind of notes you want, right? So there's a lot of self-awareness about this, is that we can only make the offer and hope that it will be received in the spirit in which we made it, which hopefully, again, is trying to make the world a better place. But you also have to know, like you said, what do I want out of this? What do I want out of this interaction? What do I want out of this space? What do I want out of this meeting? What do I want out of embarking on this project? The more you know that, I think the more you can, again, live your life on purpose and with purpose and have it be a life that you want. So there we go.
Yeah.
And now I'm stepping off my soapbox and going back.
I love that. And even if you don't, and I'm just going to add one more small piece, which is sometimes I don't know the exact words of what I want, but it's a feeling, or it's like this color, like, you know what I mean? Like, I may not be able to articulate it, but just asking myself that and just going, oh yeah, it's something, I can't name it. That's good enough too, right? Kind of like, yeah, getting a sense of it as I walk into a meeting, or getting a sense of that as I go into a restaurant, like getting a sense of like, I want some sort of good in this is enough. Yeah. Thank you for having this wonderful conversation. I love this.
Oh, me too. And it's interesting. What you said also sparked something else for me. That notion of the feeling. We have an amazing detector right inside us all the time. We do. It's the belly clench. The belly clench will tell you if your belly clenches, that's a fight or flight response, right? So if you're feeling it, there's something there that you can examine. There's something there that you can figure out. And if there's no belly clench, if you feel calm, if your organism feels okay, then that might be a positive thing that you can move towards as opposed to moving away. So I always, when I talk to my clients, when I do my presentations at companies and organizations, we talk about the belly clench a lot, because that is the organism preparing to flee, so
Mm.
so there's something really powerful about that information. And if you start paying attention to it, you will get a lot of information about whether or not what you're in front, what faces you, with the part of the buffet you're at, is something you want, like crispy artichoke hearts, or something you don't want, like mushed peas. So there's a little bit of something there for you to take away with you if you're listening to this. I if it's okay with you, James, I know I could keep you here for the next 6 hours, and I know that you have a day to get back to. I would love to ask you, we started this conversation talking about pronouns, and I would love to ask you, honestly, talk to me about that. What is it about pronouns? What are we doing when we respect pronouns? What's going on with it? I would love just an overview if you don't mind.
I discovered this a couple of years ago, that the idea of pronouns. And oh God, what a learning curve it's been on that. But the general idea, I think, to my mind, is it's a simple and concrete way to show that we respect and share people's pronouns. Like that we share, when we share our pronouns, we're showing that we can share it and that we will respect ours and other people's pronouns based on what they tell us. I mean, it's like sharing your name, right? Like earlier you said, do I go by James, Jimmy, Jim? Like, that's a great question, because some people won't ask and they'll just start calling me Jimmy. And I'm like, who's that? Like, you might
Right.
as well call me Frank, right? And so I think pronouns are the same thing here, except the interesting thing about pronouns is that they're usually not used when the person's around. I mean, sometimes they are, but usually it's when they're not there, you're talking about the person. So that's when you use the pronoun, right? And so what I learned is in the TGNC-MB communities, transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary communities, there's this term called misgendering, right? Misgendering is not using the correct gender of that person. And by learning the person's pronoun, by letting them know you respect their pronouns, it makes misgendering even less. So this is a violence prevention effort, really, because when folks are being misgendered, especially those who are in the TGNCMB community, it heightens gender dysphoria, which heightens other issues like depression and suicide. Now, I'm not saying one misgendering is going to lead to all that. I'm saying that this is just one piece of this enormous thing that we're trying to unpack, right? So that was my start. And later on, as I started doing this work and the pandemic happened, and we were like, I have students who are like on our screen right now on Zoom. I realized we were doing this as an audio recording, but like I have my name there, but not my face, right? I realized that I had a lot of students who would do that. And I had non-white names, right? Non-white sounding names. And I don't know their gender. Like, I can assume James, right, is male, or even though I might be wrong. But like, I realized there's a racial component here, right? Isolda, if I don't know that name and I'm used to only white sounding names, I don't know the pronoun that you use. So that's why if we put it in our Zoom accounts or our emails or whatever, like, it saves the person from having to ask it, but also it lets the person know that you are actually respectful of people's pronouns as well, right? And if we all did that, it would just make a huge difference. I think it normalizes the fact that we use pronouns. And so someone who's part of the TGNCMB community who might not pass, who might pass, whatever, it makes it easier for them to share their pronouns too. Otherwise, they're the only ones in the room calling out saying, hey, we need to make sure that pronouns are used here.
I'm taking all this in.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So that's the main point, right? The main point is to normalize the sharing of pronouns. Now, there are many complex other complex issues. Like, if I'm running a group with those who are part of my classrooms, for example, I ask my students to share their name and pronouns if they feel comfortable with that. And I also give a quick lesson for those of you who are like, what are they still talking about? I don't understand this pronoun. Here's how I explain it. If I left my cell phone behind, I would want you to say he left his cell phone. Here are the pronouns. Or I would want you to say they left their pronouns. Either one works for me. But if you said she left her pronouns, I would be like, who are you talking about? Because you're not talking about me, right? And so that's the way to think about pronouns. Yeah. And so when we share pronouns, it actually makes it easier for the person to know what your pronouns are and to respect you. And you're hopefully letting people know that you are being respectful to them. And the complexity is, some people may not feel comfortable sharing their pronouns. And I'm talking about those in the TGNCMB communities might not feel comfortable because maybe they're not out yet, right? And so maybe they don't want to share. So I never force anyone to share. I invite, just like we invite people to meetings or parties or to the buffet, we can invite people and just let people know that they can always pass.
It's like filling out a form where they ask for your gender, and I am always happy when I see prefer not to say as one of the options. Like I just was filling out a tax form for some of my contractors, and they asked, that as part of filling out the form, I had to give my name, my address, blah, blah, and they asked for my gender. And there's a number of different options, but the last one was prefer not to say. And I went, oh, cool. That's because I remember when I first started filling out forms, that was not ever, there were two and that was it. And it's a different world in many ways from when I was in college. And it's funny how much we talk about college in this conversation. This is a quick little story for you. When I filled out my application to go to the University of Michigan and to get housing assignment, they thought I was a boy and put me in an all-male house wing of East Quad, which is sort of the arts dorm. And I got there and they said, wait, you're in Second Hayden? You can't be in Second Hayden. And I was like, why not? And they said, because it's an all male floor. You can't live there and there are no other spaces. So I ended up in a completely different dorm and had a completely different college experience because of that. It was complete. I was living in the same dorm as the hockey team and the baseball team and not as the artists. So it was a really interesting moment in my life going, yeah. And it was because of my name. They saw my name and were like, yeah, I have no idea what this is. So there
They
is
didn't
this.
ask.
Yeah. And, it was all done by mail. This is pre-internet. So there was no contact or anything asking. So this is one of those times where you have to think to yourself, what, who are we and what does it mean when we are asking for that as part of who we are and as part of being respectful to ourselves and each other. So it's important, I think, that we really work through that and figure it out. Moving again, kindness first. That's my soapbox, and I'm going to stand on that one. Kindness first. I really want to thank you. I know I could, as I said, I could keep you here another 6 hours, but I know, as I said, you have a day to get back to. I am so grateful, James, that you took the time to be here and to talk about this. And we're going to do that giveaway, and I'm going to put a picture of the pin. And remember, if you go to give me the Instagram account again, as far as the queer name challenges. No, what was
Query pronoun challenge.
Query pronoun challenge.
One word.
Yes. Go there, and if you have your pronouns out there, they will feature your page. And if you follow this podcast, you can get entered to win the pin, which will be really cool. And I love the pin is gorgeous. You will love it. I'm just saying. All right, cool. James, I have one question that I ask everyone who comes on the show. And it's the last question I have for you. And it's a silly question, but I find that it can yield some profound answers. And the question is this: if you had an airplane that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Goodness, I might need a second on that.
Take your time.
Oof. I tend to ramble, so I could see this being a paragraph long, but they may run out of
Exactly. That's
cloud.
what. That's why I made the question the way I made it. It's got to be short and succinct.
It's like a tweet. Yikes! Wow. I'll get back to you next. No, that's not going to work. Let's see. What would I want people to? I guess from James' perspective, right? I feel like, so not speaking about Query, but speaking from me as James Young, I guess I would play something along the lines of, something like hang in there, it's just smoke. To play, because I guess there's a comic part of myself, right, that says that's what you're seeing in the sky. It's not even, it's not even real, right? It's just smoke. But also just let people know that maybe life is kind of like that. Like, it's just a lot of it's smoke and mirrors, like our armor, our whatever is like, maybe it's just something that if we hang in long enough, right, we might notice that, and then we can actually create our own ideas and our own authentic ideas, as well as create even some of the fun smoke and mirror stuff too that might be interesting.
Yeah, and we can all marvel at each other's and really be there for each other as we explore. And I think that's a lot of what you and I have been talking about today is that there is an open-hearted exploration to be had in the space that you're talking about in Query, but also in society, in all of our cultures. We can all be open and respectful and learn and listen and all of that stuff, as long as it's, and this is my, again, personal soapbox, in kindness. So James, again, I'm super, super grateful that you took the time, and I hope that you'll come back, and I would love to talk more at some point. I know you have a day to get back to, but I'm really grateful. Thank you for being here.
My goodness, thank you for making the time, and thank your listeners for listening and spending this time listening to us.
Ah, what a great conversation. This has been Isolde Trachtenberg and James Young for the Innovative Mindset Podcast. My brain is fried. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It's just fried. That's the best way of saying it. And I'm hungry, so I want to go eat, and I'm going to go do that too. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please drop a line. Let me know. All of the links for Query and the various Instagrams are all in the show notes, so that you can learn more and get more information, more ideas, more everything, because doggone it, we all deserve it. We all deserve to be ourselves. Until next time, I always remind you to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2022. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, remember to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind.